think the biggest mistake I see student teachers make is a failure to truly mentally prepare for the experience. And so I think academically they feel like they're ready, but I think just the emotional transition is the thing for which they haven't prepared. Leaving their friends behind, some of them are moving back home and living with family, and that's a whole dynamic that they hadn't really anticipated.
As I supervise student teachers, of being consistent, of following through, that if you're with management, that if you say something, that you need to follow through and you need to be consistent from situation to situation, but also from student to student. And that's hard for a student teacher, to be consistent with management, with discipline, with everything.
I think that one of the biggest challenges that becomes a mistake for student teachers is forgetting to communicate with their supervisor and their cooperating teacher. That communication is so important, and sometimes we're so worried about saying, oh, this, I don't understand what you're asking, and asking for those clarifications because we're afraid that it makes us look inferior. Well, in all actuality, asking for help and asking for those clarifications is one of the biggest things that you can do to make yourself successful. And so being afraid to ask those questions becomes a mistake that sometimes we see student teachers make.
The other thing I see them do that I think interferes with their success is they don't, day to day, don't prepare. And so they've been in a pattern of procrastination with their work, their schoolwork, and so they try to keep that pattern, and it doesn't work. So the key to success is to be prepared and to be able to anticipate in the classroom, and they're not ready to do that.
One is that they need to be confident in themselves. And when you walk in and you're confident about what you're doing, and you have all prepared and done so much in your coursework that you are ready for this. Graceland really does a nice job of preparing you for the professional semester. So being confident in yourself and knowing I have people who've helped get me to this point. Those people I can call and ask questions if I need supports, but being confident is key.
In my mind, I think open communication more than anything else. Open communication with their cooperating teacher is the biggest hurdle, I believe, and probably the best way to be successful. Also being open to and communicate openly with the supervising teacher. So if they fear something, they need to talk about that fear. If they're nervous about something, they need to be able to talk about it and talk about why.
In order to find success during student teaching, they need to ask lots of questions. They need to not just rely on their cooperating teacher, but on other teachers. They need to take, during their prep period, I know they want to just, exhale and take a break, but I think it will help them if they step in and observe somebody else. That if they can have the opportunity to watch their students, especially elementary, in another venue. So go with them to PE rather than taking that break from the students. Go with them and see what level of performances or engagement students have in a different arena, in a different context.
Not be afraid to try something new, and not be open to suggestions. I think that's another area that helps students to be successful, is know that you're not going to do everything well the first really good the first time, and so you're going to make mistakes, but it's always going to get better, and you have to be okay with that I'm not going to be exemplary all the way through. So that's probably what I would suggest.
It is also important to understand that you have all these skill sets, but there's still a lot more to learn. And so entering that semester knowing that you're going to be exhausted, it is the most exhausting semester that you will have, because there's so much coming at you at once. And so breaking it down into smaller parts and tackling things, when you take over a subject, taking over something that you feel most comfortable with first, and then becoming really good at that for a week, and then adding something slowly. But don't just go in and jump in and say, okay, I'm ready for everything, even though you feel like that, because you want to make sure that you're successful.
I think that student teachers still need to be reading and going back to their philosophy of ed and say, this is what I believe about teaching. And every single day reflecting on that. Every single day. I know we make you reflect, and everybody hates that because it feels like busy work. But the reflective process of, what did I do today? How did it work? If I did it over again, how would I do it differently? Truly prepares you for the next day. And it is about being that reflective practitioner. And it helps you locate yourself in the profession.
Another piece of that, I think, is that you need to have fun, because you're there with the students. Embrace the students. Enjoy every minute you have with them. Learn from the things that they say. Learn from your mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. Expert teachers teach a lesson and walk away from it and say, whew, that was awful. I've got to go back and reteach it the next day. And remember, that's okay. But have fun with your professional semester as well.
Too many, I think, see it as a 14 weeks that I just got to get through, rather than seeing as this is an extended learning opportunity. This happens way more than people think. My advice is open, honest communication. My advice is day one, you sit down and tell them, I need feedback, and can we set a regular opportunity for me to receive feedback, whether that's the last 10 minutes before we both leave at night, whether it's Friday at noon, we sit down and process the week, and to say, you can't hurt my feelings. I need open, honest communication.
Be willing to understand that it is their classroom and they need to make the decisions, and no matter whether you agree with it or not, that it is their classroom and they're responsible for the students in that classroom. And so that's really important.
The final thing I would say is everything has the capacity to teach you something. The good, the bad, and the indifferent. And at the end of every day, no matter how difficult it is with that supervisor or cooperating teacher, you go home and say, what did I learn today? And to truly adopt the mindset, the learner mindset, right? The growth mindset, that this taught me something today. If you have the open, honest relationship, it just makes it all easier. And that when you can say, it bothers me when you do this. But the bottom line, you're in a borrowed classroom with borrowed children, and this sounds very cold, but really suck it up, man. Because we are not very quick. You know how long it took to get these placements. We are not quick to yank it out because you're uncomfortable. Learning is uncomfortable. Teaching is uncomfortable. Growth in ourselves is uncomfortable. Working with people who are different than us is uncomfortable. We're in a borrowed classroom, borrowed students. This is their rules, and it's uncomfortable. You have to learn how to walk around in that. Those are limitations to be able to exercise what you believe, but you have to learn to walk around in it.
Well, one of the first things I think that we always need to think about is that all of our conversations, if we're having a hard time and maybe our personalities don't go together like we thought maybe they would, that we think about the students. So putting the students first, I think, really makes a difference.
Have communication with your cooperating teacher and with your supervisor. If something happens that you just can't get along, bring in the supervising teacher. So one of us, bring in your university supervisor, and we would help really, I guess, sort out the problems.
Part of that disconnect is that cooperating teachers often get frustrated with student teachers, but instead of telling them, they just sort of stuff it down in, and so then those behaviors start coming, like tension and animosity and passive aggressive behaviors, because they're afraid to be honest with the student teacher, because they're afraid, they don't want to discourage them and all that stuff. Student teachers, go out, say, I want as much feedback as possible. I'm wearing armor. You can't hurt my feelings. Give it to me.
The other thing is reach out to your university supervisor right away and say, here are some things I'm concerned about, and they can help you brainstorm in your situation what's the best approach to use. But don't keep that all inside until it's like 4 or 5 weeks down the road and then you have a blow up, because it's best for your university supervisor to be involved right away if there are any of those issues that you're even concerned about at all.
Now, sometimes there just simply are personality conflicts, and there's just no way around it. How do you survive that? You survive that by being an adult, by recognizing that you're going to have colleagues that you aren't going to love, but they're going to be your colleagues. And a collaborative relationship is going to be critical in order for all students to learn to their maximum potential. And so you have to work together. That said, you talk to your university supervisors. You need some place to balance it all. Don't be talking on Facebook. Don't talk to your roommate. Don't talk to your friends about this person is an awful person, because it will track you down. So you find a professional with whom you can talk to just maintain a perspective. Perspective is the key. For me, when I read a journal, I want to see your capacity to make connections. Connections to theories, connection to theorists, connections to your philosophy, connections to your future practice. That's way more important to me than anything else, is the connections. That you're not just writing for writing's sakes and slapping something behind there. Is this really, do you really understand this? But more importantly, the reflection.
I think for me, I have my students really focus on 1 or 2 in-task standards a week, and to stay focused on those in-task standards so that it isn't just a broad play-by-play of your week, because what we're actually looking for is what you're learning and your takeaway.
I think that no matter what in-task standard you're writing to, it has to be, it has to have connections to what you're doing in the classroom and what you would do as a future teacher. And so, and it has to be, you have to really think about what you are doing and why it supports students. And
I also want to see student teachers considering their own professional growth and development. And so we had a student last semester, actually this semester, one of your people, who every week at the top of his journal, he said, the challenge I've presented myself is to grow in this area. You know, I've been struggling with this thing with wait time. Here's evidence of that. And I'm going to, with intention, set out to grow in that area. And then he reflected on that growth in the journal. And then he talked about how it impacted student learning. It talked about how it impacted his relationship with his cooperating teacher, who was clearly frustrated, but like I don't know how many times or how many ways I can tell you this, but it truly impacted her ability to say, wow, you got it. Mm-hmm. And so to be intentional about what is an area that I can improve that I think would directly impact my experience and the experience of the students. So that was powerful.
avoid it?
I can think of many.
I did work with one student teacher who did decide that her placement wasn't correct for her. And I think that deep down, right away, within the first couple weeks, she felt that it wasn't the best situation for her, but kept trying to gut it out. And knowing that, you know, you can overcome anything and trying to work through every obstacle, but it just wasn't a grade level that she felt comfortable with or would like to teach in the future. And so I think one of the things, instead of keeping trucking through those situations, okay, I can suck this up, I can get through anything, you really want this semester to be something that is meaningful and that provides your most learning. So being able to say, okay, right away, this isn't right, let's figure out something. I think that if we would have been able to make that decision earlier, it would have been better. She was able to successfully complete student teaching and did a fabulous job, but when you make that decision earlier rather than later, your options are more wide open.
The first one that comes to mind is a student teacher who was working in a school. So was working with a teacher who was her sister's best friend, her older sister's best friend. They worked in different districts. They went to college together somewhere. So they worked in different districts. So the student teacher was living with her sister. So she would come home and she would complain about her cooperating teacher. Like, God, she just harps at the students, and, you know, man, she does all this worksheets, and she's so mean, and she's really favors this student, and she really missed the mark today on a lesson. The kids were bored out of their gourd, and she just kept on teaching. So I get that we need a place to vent, but this student forgot about the relationship that preceded the experience. And so her sister goes out with her friend one night, and she's like, oh my God, you ought to hear my sister. She says this about you, this and this and this about you. Boom, she was gone. She was done. I had a call at home that night, get her out of my room. Is that people know people that know people that know people, right? So another one, this happened last year, where a student did not bond with her cooperating teacher, but she did bond with the teacher across the hall. And they often co-taught, okay? So like 2 hours a day, or for 2 content areas they co-taught. But the problem was that she created this relationship with this other teacher, and then they started comparing notes and what they didn't like about her cooperating teacher. And so then it got back to the cooperating teacher that, yeah, you ought to hear her, the way she talks about you. Oh my God. Boom. What gets you in trouble? Disasters. You don't keep on your journals. You get pulled from your practice. You don't write your lesson plans. We come out to see you. It's like if you don't do the paperwork, which is an important part, that's a disaster. Disaster. Show up on time. Communicate that you're not going to be there when you're not going to be there. Be professional at all times. Keep your phone away. Don't text your students, even if it's like, this is what the assignment is, and then the student says, you're awesome, and you type back, you're awesome too, and the parent found the phone and said, okay, he's in an inappropriate relationship with my middle school student. And that it's not just 14 weeks to get over with. Like, oh, only 6 more weeks, only 4 more weeks. It's not a countdown. It's not like when you're in high school and you're going to graduate and you're a senior and you're crossing off the calendar days.
I think the thing that I try to tell my students, or at least student teachers ahead of time, to soak up as much as you possibly can.
One thing that I would say is to communicate with your cooperating teacher as early as you can.
You know, it's not a bad thing that we didn't teach you everything that there was to know. That's what this experience, student teaching, is all about.
I think that sometimes we think about like lesson planning. So the template that we use at Graceland sometimes looks different than what's used at the school that you're in. And so making sure to ask those clarifying questions about what do you mean by this portion? What does this part look like to you? I think that makes a huge difference, because what you're thinking might be an assessment might not be something that they consider an assessment. So talking through each of those pieces, I think is important.
That's a good one. I could use that.
Yeah.
As faculty members, we can't prepare you for everything. That we just can't. You're going to learn so much more, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but I feel like that student teaching is it is that capstone experience. You're going to learn so much more in student teaching than what I can give you in a single class.
Every day is an opportunity for you to learn more about yourself as a teacher. There's all the student learning and there's all that stuff that matters too, but for me, this experience is about you extending what you were challenged to do in LEP and classroom management. What is the ground on which you stand? What is it that you believe about teaching and learning? What's going to inform your decisions? What philosophies? What ideas? What are you willing to fall on your sword over? And are you able to finally talk the talk and walk the walk and have the courage and conviction to do so? To me, it is about emerging into this person that you have imagined yourself to be. And yeah, there's a lot of other consequences to this. There's student learning, and there's relationships with cooperating teachers, and a university supervisor is going to fly by, and your parents are going to be still asking you, what are you going to do and what are you going to be, and you have girlfriends and boyfriends that you have to try to establish. Okay, what's next for us? And all sorts of critical relationships. But at the end of the day, who am I? At the end of the day, I want this experience to help define for you who you are, what are you meant to do in this world, and what's next? How are you going to do it?